Hey, welcome. My name is Candy Creech, and I'm going to go through the workbook that we created for the Gospel of John. And it can be an in-depth study, or it doesn't have to be as in-depth if you don't want it to be. And that's why I like the workbook. But the point of it is, it's not a typical Bible study where somebody asks you a couple of questions and they write all these pages in there telling you about the book. Okay. This is really going to be you digging in for yourself and learning. And then I'll be doing some videos over some different things, but it's really about you learning how to study the Bible if that's something you've struggled with in the past. And I think the Gospel of John is a really great one because it really points us to Jesus. It's got so much good stuff in it. And I'm going to tell you, if there are things that you don't understand, it's okay. You don't have to understand absolutely everything that you read. I know for me, when there's something that I'm just not understanding in the Bible, or maybe there's a topic that I really just struggle with, is this right? Is this wrong? And I just want to pray and I want God to give me the answer. And what I've learned is when I do that, He will start pointing me in that direction. It's kind of interesting. It's like everything I start seeing, I'm like, oh, that's the question that I asked him about. Let me dig a little deeper here. Or I'm in a Bible study. Oh, that's the question I ask about. Let me dig a little deeper. And that's what he wants us to do. He wants us to go deep on our own to find that answer. And so that's what I want you guys to do. So this workbook, you can just print it off. It's on a PDF. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to kind of go through it. I have it right here, sitting here because I've already been working on it. But what I wanted to show you were a couple of things that really, if you don't have a good study Bible with some good references in it, then I would say get you a good study Bible. And there's a lot of different kinds out there. I like to have a few to use. So one new one I got recently is this one right here. And it's an NIV, but it's a women's study Bible. Okay. And I really like it because everything extra that's written in here is geared towards women. So that's pretty cool. This one is a MacArthur Study Bible. This is actually in King James Version, New King James Version, because I do like to use different books. I'm at different versions when I'm studying. So I like to have an NIV and I like to have a King James version to study with. And then sometimes I look at ESV, the English Standard Version, but it's very similar to NIV. Okay. Um, you can look at NLT, the New Living Translation, is what's called a transliteration of the Bible. That means it's not translated word for word like King James or NIV or ESV. Those are translated words for words. So that's a translation. NLT is called a transliteration, which means it may have like 3 or 4 words that mean this one word in like the Greek or Hebrew or something like that. So it's great to read in, but I don't like studying in it because if I want to look up a Greek word in the New Testament or Hebrew word in the Old Testament, I can't do that because it's not a translation. So that's just a little tip for you. But I love this John MacArthur Study Bible. My kids got this for me for Mother's Day one year. And I never take it anywhere with me. I just keep it at home to study. But I'm going to show you just something if you can see this right here. So this is John, but it gives you all this extra information. Okay. So you definitely want the extra information. And then I'll show you, it also does an outline of each book. It's going to kind of tell you who the author is, what's the setting, what's the time frame, when did they think this was written, how did they know? Some of them will tell you like how did they know that this is actually a real God-breathed book of the Bible and not just a historical reference. So I want to show you a couple of things in here. So all of this right here is just notes, reference notes, commentary on the first chapter. So when we get in this first chapter, we're going to it's going to say things like, I don't have my glasses on, so I'll try to read. It's going to say things like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and He was in the beginning with God. Okay, you're like, what? So it's great to have that little commentary at the bottom. Okay. So get you a good study Bible. There's also lots of apps that you can use for that too. Okay. So let's hop into the workbook. So first of all, I wrote a little introduction for you. But at the bottom here, I gave you some studying tips, and this can go anytime you study the Bible. I mean, I'll do topical studies if there's something that I want to know about, but I really like to study by books because when you study by a book, you get to see like the whole theme of what's going on here. When was it written? Who is it written to? What was the purpose of the writing? Like, you want to ask all these questions when you're looking at that. So, here are some things that you can do. So I want to go through these, but I put this in the workbook. Okay. So if you want to watch, if you haven't printed the workbook, maybe pause this video, print the workbook, or come back and watch it when you print it. I think it'll help you a lot more for you to read along with me. So the first thing that you want to do every time you read text is ask the questions. I call them 5 W's and an H. Okay. The 5 W questions: who, what, when, where, why, and the H question is how. Okay. So when you're reading that text, when we get into John and we read chapter 1, you're right. Who wrote the book? What was the purpose of writing this? When was it written? Maybe where, because a lot of times when I think of where, I always think of the cultural setting. Like, if it, like when you look at the books, the letters that Paul wrote to the churches, it really matters what was going on, where those people were, where that church was. And you can really compare, because this is where people can get things really messed up and taken out of context, because they don't look at the cultural and historical setting, because it really opens your eyes to why would Paul be saying this? And it's the same thing with the Gospel of John. Like, why is he trying? When you start reading, you'll see what's happening. He's trying to show them so hard that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Messiah. And so you just really think about that. But do we know that? Well, no. Does it tell us in the Bible? No. But people that have researched and read other historical books as went along with that time, like um, I think I was just thinking of one off the top of my head, like the book of Josephus, that there was another one that's a really great historical reference during that time that a lot of Bible scholars use. And there's a lot of other ones that I have no idea about. But we can usually trust the things that they're telling us. Okay, this was kind of the setting at the time and things like that. Okay. So every time you read, just ask those questions. It's that reading comprehension. Look for comparisons and contrast in the text. So we're going to do a contrast that I'm going to show you in a minute. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute, but look for those things you can compare and things you can contrast in the text. Look for keywords and make a list of what you learn from them. So a keyword is just a word that's repeated over and over again. And usually you can see those in either a whole chapter or a section of a chapter. So say that when you look at chapter 1, there's sections. There's the first part that's telling you all about Jesus, and then there's the next part about John the Baptist talking about Jesus. Okay. And then there's the next part, Jesus is calling some disciples. All that's in chapter 1. And so in the first part, you're going to see a very common word used over and over again, a key word. It's word. It is the word. And so what you want to do is you want to write those down. This is where the Bible can really come to life for you. So if you're reading and going, I didn't get anything out of that, if you will do these steps, it will it's like this. I feel like there's this surface and it's like one dimension when I read. And then when I start making the keywords and making the list and asking the questions and doing the comparison and contrast, it's like I was able to reach through that. And now it's like this three-dimensional thing. If that, I hope that makes sense to you. But it just opens it up so much. So another reference that, or something that you can look for, are references to time. Okay. Sometimes there's references to time. Let's just think about Genesis. In the beginning, God created, the heaven and the earth, and, day and night. It was the first day. Like, that's a reference to time. So there can be all kinds of references to time. You're going to see it in John. And just thinking off the top of my head, of course, when you get to the crucifixion, because you're going to see them observing the Passover, you're going to see the crucifixion, you're going to see the day they can't do anything, which is the Sabbath. There, nothing happened there. They couldn't do anything on the Sabbath. And then you're going to see the day that he rose from that. So those references to time are important. Look for events and then make a list of what you learned from the events. So in the Gospel of John, you're going to see Jesus perform miracles. That's a great event to write down, and write down like what the event was and kind of what you learned from that event. Because when you take one thing or one verse or one word, you don't get to see the whole picture. But when you start looking at Jesus performed this miracle here, and I learned this from it, and then he performed this one over here, and I learned this from it, you see this cohesiveness to it. It's really cool. And then you can use a study Bible to look up cross references. So one of my Bibles, this one, this is my Bible, like I carry to church, you know, I read a lot out of and everything, but I don't necessarily study a lot in here because it don't have cross references. So what are the cross references? So if you look, let me see, I don't think you can see it. So there's probably no sense in me really showing you, but in this one, it's a great one because in the middle here, it has all these other verses. Okay, so cross reference is it'll give you a verse, it'll have a little letter beside it, and it'll tell you there's another verse that kind of can help explain this verse. And maybe that verse is in the Old Testament, the New Testament, I don't know, but it'll reference to another verse. So I really like cross referencing when there's something I'm just not understanding. It's a little confusing to me, or I know that they are referring to the Old Testament and there's a verse in there of prophecy lots of times they're referring to. I'll go back and look at that. The other time is topical studies. When you're doing a topical study, if you're not careful, you will take something out of context. So if you cross reference everything that has to do with that topic across the whole Bible, then you're gonna make sure that you stay in context on that. Okay. So those are just that's just some clarification on just some study tips for you. Okay. So this is your first sheet that you're going to have in your workbook. You're going to say, okay, who wrote the book? Okay, well, obviously John, but which John, right? There's a number of Johns. So if you will look in the front of the Gospel of John, like if you have a study Bible, it's going to tell you like who this John was. Okay. I'm also going to talk about it on chapter 1 when I go over it. I want to talk about that a little bit. What was the cultural setting, which we know were in I guess the Romans were in control at that time, right? Yeah. So always have like with geography and culture and things like that, like I am not the best at that. Like I have, even if I've studied a lot, I have to like go back and like remember, okay, Candy, let me go back and think who was in control, who, you know, that kind of thing. And then what was the purpose for writing? So, and I'll tell you right now, John's purpose was very evangelistic for writing the Gospel of John because when you look at the four gospels, they have a different tone to them. Okay. And John is very evangelistic in that. But I gave these to you because every time you study a book, you want that. Okay. So key terms. This is where you're just going to make a list when you see repeated words in key terms. So I'll give you a tip. Usually God, Jesus, and Holy Spirit are always going to be key terms. So when you are referring to key terms, like say you want to take a key term and you want to make a list from it, then what you're going to do is you're going to also look for pronouns. So if you took Jesus as a key term and it said he was with God in the beginning, then he is also the key term. So you always want to look for pronouns. And the way I make my keyword list is I write down, and let me see, I did this in here already. I actually write down the keyword. Okay. And what you'll do is you'll add to it. So you'll like have it because we go by this chapter by chapter. So you'll have it for chapter 1, right? And then if that keyword comes up again in another chapter, you're going to add to it from that chapter. So you can just make you separate sheets of paper for keywords. That's what I usually do when I'm doing this kind of studying. I know for some people it gets them a little bit off track if they can't add to something like I'm, oh my gosh, I've already started this. So I don't ever start like, this is my keyword I started for Jesus. I'm not going to jump down here and start another different keyword because I know I'm going to be using this for the whole book. Okay. Let me say this about keywords. If that is overwhelming to you, don't do it because I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm failing. I'm doing something wrong. I can't do this. Don't do it. There's no wrong about this. Okay. So what I would suggest is, since this is the Gospel of John, since it is talking about Jesus, the one key word you're going to want to do is Jesus. If you can't do the other ones, that's okay. If you see something that interests you, then make a list from that key word. So but let me just give you an example of what this does, how I do it. And then in chapter 1, I'm going to show you like how it kind of comes to life when you do this. But So Jesus, what I do is I write chapter 1 and then I put like verse 1. And I don't want to completely paraphrase a verse just because those words are God breathed and there's like it's like the Holy Spirit is in those words, and I don't want to make it completely into my own words for the purpose of this because I want to reread the words that are in the Bible. So I may do a little paraphrasing or I may shorten something, but I don't completely paraphrase everything. So verse 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." I'm basically taking that and rewriting it. And I don't rewrite all of it, but and then verse 2, I just put through him all things were made. Okay. So I just list out everything I'm learning about Jesus. Verse 3, in him was life. Okay. Verse 9, the true light that gives light to everyone. Okay. Verse 14, the word became flesh and he made his dwelling among us. So that's just what I'm doing, taking everything I'm learning about Jesus, and he's a key word in there. Okay. So you're going to do that. So on this under here, if you just want to make a list of all the keywords from the book as you're going through it, and then on another piece of paper, whichever ones that you want to list out. Because I'll be honest with you, depending on my time, depending on how deep I want to dig, I may skip over and not always do keywords. Okay. I mean, I'll just do the main ones. I won't do all of them, is what I'm saying. Okay. Now, the other thing that you're going to see in here is you're going to see I call them characters, right? Like if this was a book, they would have characters. Well, you're going to encounter the disciples in here, and you're going to encounter women that served in Jesus's ministry, which is really cool to say that. And you're going to encounter friends and all kinds of people. So we made these little boxes for you to put in each character's name and then write a little bit about what you learn about that character, however much you want to write. Okay. So in chapter 1, I'm going to go through a couple of those and show you what I mean on that. So what we did is we just made you a number of these pages. So you can print out all of them, or you can just use one or however, but I really felt like you would want to write down the disciples when you go through this. And I really felt like there's some key women in the Bible that you're going to want to write down, because this is why. If I said there's Mary, the mother of Jesus, there's Mary Magdalene, which Mary was which? It's just like John, it's just like Peter is called Simon, Peter, and Cephas. I think that's the way you say it. I don't know if that's the way you say it. So if you don't know that that's all the same Peter, right? Did you know there's James, the half brother of Jesus, and there's James, the disciple? They're two different Jameses, but James, his half brother, wrote the book of James later on because the James, the disciple, had already died. Right? Like if you don't dig a little deeper, those are things that you're going to be so confused on. So it's really important to do your work on the people, just so you're not reading going, this is so confusing, right? So we have to dig a little deeper for that. Okay. Now, comparison and contrast, guys, if you will do these things, it will just blow up what you learn. Okay. Especially here, because I'm all about overcoming limiting beliefs of biblical truth. So what does Satan do? He is here he's a thief, and it's right here on this page. Satan is a thief, and he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But what is the opposite of that? Jesus came that you may have life, and you may have it more abundantly. Okay. So I want you, as we're going through here, to contrast everywhere you see something about Jesus, something about Satan, and they're going to be opposites. There's going to be Jesus is light, Satan is dark. There's going to be all these things. I want you to write those down, because what's going to happen is it will help ingrain it in your mind, so you will know that God has good things for you. And when you are feeling like God is against you, that is not God. He didn't come to condemn us. And you're going to learn all that. And that's where these two verses right here has helped me when I've gotten down on myself about that maybe God don't want me to have this or have that or whatever. And God don't want me to have joy, or he wants me to feel this way, or he made me depressed, or whatever it was. That is a lie, because this is what it says: Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And he will do that to you. And that's not who Jesus is. So it helps you combat those lies. So what you're going to do is every time you encounter a verse, like this is from chapter 10, and I just put that in there as an example, but you just put the chapter and CH10, V10, Darlene's like, I hope you're not confusing people by doing that. I'm like, well, I think everybody gets that abbreviation. But it's your paper, so you can write it whatever makes sense to you when you're doing it. But as you're going through, keep a list. Now, there's other things you can also compare and contrast. I'll talk about that in for chapter 1. So we made you 2 pages of this. You can print this one without the example on it more than one time, depending on how many pages you need for that. Okay, and then we have events like I talked about earlier. So here's your event page. What's the event? Where is it found in scripture? So you can go back to it and read it later if you want to. And then what can you learn from this event, if anything? And I think you will learn something. But lots of times you'll learn it from looking at the keywords in the event, looking at asking the 5 W's and H for the event, like what was going on here? Why was Jesus here? Who was he speaking to? What was happening? What was the setting? Where were they? Like all those things, like how did he come about performing this miracle, or if that's what it was. So you're going to have these for your events. Okay. And I think that, yeah. And then the other is you just have like a blank paper. So if you need to just print that out for your notes, to make your notes and everything, it's going to be a note page. So that is kind of going through the workbook right there. And then, I will do chapter 1. Okay. So if you want to kind of go through that one together a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to take the things I just showed you a little bit deeper with chapter 1. So see you guys soon.